Shabbat Shalom, everyone. One of the things I love about Agudas Achim is teaching the same Torah Parsha to different groups. It's really fascinating teaching the little kids a story or an idea from the Parsha, and then teaching our teenagers the same thing, and then teaching adult education the same idea, the same story, because all three groups usually have three radically different responses. But sometimes they respond in a similar way, which is really another cool effect. So the other day, I was teaching Parshat Chayei, our Parsha, to the kids in the religious school on Sunday morning. And I was telling them the story of Abraham's servant and how he is told to go and find a wife for Isaac. So he travels to a foreign town and he's waiting at the well. Rebecca approaches and she gives him water, and then we're told that she waters his camels as well. And this is a powerful story because it creates a powerful image of how to interact with people and how to do acts of chesed, loving kindness. But I think the next part of the story is likewise interesting because it almost oftentimes gets overlooked. When Abraham's servant, Eliezer, goes to Rebecca's family's house, he recounts to them the story of how Rebecca was kind to him at the well and says that he wants her to return with him in order that she can marry Isaac, a man that she has never even met. Now, in the ancient world, girls were married off to men all the time. That was the custom. It would have not been unlikely that a girl like Rebecca would have been married off to a distant relative in her tribe, and usually the matter would have been settled by the men of her family, and it would have been a done deal. However, the text does something very interesting here. The male members of Rebecca's family ask her for her input on the situation. This is from chapter 24, verse 58, we're told, "They called Rebecca and said to her, 'Will you go with this man?' And she said, 'I will.'" Now, when the kids and I studied this story the other day, there was some hesitation on the kids when Rebecca willingly decided to just go off and marry a complete stranger. Because for them, the idea of a young woman just leaving everything that she knew behind to just go with a man she barely met, to marry another man she knows nothing about. It was too much for our kids. So they began arguing amongst themselves, and I remember one of the kids said to another, "Why would she just up and leave? That's crazy." And the other young woman responded, she said, "She had to do it. It was her duty." I think there's a lot of beauty and wisdom in that response. If we look at the verse that we just read, if we look at the Hebrew of it, when her family asks, "Will you go with this man?" Rebecca doesn't respond with, "I will." She replies with the Hebrew word elech, which literally means "I will walk," right? I will go, I will walk. This is a derivative of the Hebrew word halak, which means to walk. The Jewish word for Jewish law, halakha, is based on this world. The idea of halakha is that when we serve God through mitzvot, we are metaphorically walking righteously with God. So one of the many definitions a religious Jew can find for the word halak is to serve. It could be one of them. I really like this definition because when they ask Rebecca, "Will you go with this man?" she responds with the very powerful answer. Really, it would be translated as, "I will serve." And I think that is exactly the idea the young student was channeling when she said she had to do it. It's her duty. So on a completely different note, I want to talk about a figure from history. Many of you probably have never heard of him. I hadn't heard of him until recently. He was a German medieval knight, and his name was John of Bohemia. And he's probably the most interesting knight I've ever read about. He had the nickname of John the Blind because even though he was a knight, he had lost his eyesight at only the age of 39. And although he was completely blind, John of Bohemia remained a powerful war general and tactician. He would sit on his horse, true story, above the battlefield, and he would have his advisors describe to him what was going on below him. Couldn't see anything. And he won many, many battles doing this. He soon became very feared amongst his rivals. He was a prominent figure in the 100 Years' War when England fought France. John was king of Bohemia, but he was loyal to the French crown, so much so that his motto, which he had embroidered on his banners, it read in German, Ich dien, meaning I serve. So in 1346, when Philip of France asked for help from nobles all over Europe to help defend the French monarchy, John the Blind answered the call at age 50, thus living up to his motto of I serve. He led an army of 12,000 men, many of whom were mounted knights, against the English army who had arrived at the French town of Chayei. This is near Paris. And seeing as how the French knights outnumbered the English 2-1, and how the French forces consisted of mounted knights on horseback, John thought he could easily overtake the English army of peasants and farmers armed with only arrows and chainmail. However, historians estimate that 6,000 English archers could shoot 12 arrows a minute. That means 72,000 arrows rained down on the French army every minute. Additionally, this is the first known battle where the English introduced a new fabled weapon known as the cannon, which could pummel enemy forces with gunpowder and cannonballs, essentially making mounted knights on horseback an easy target. This was kind of the first battle where they would quickly disappear. Needless to say, John the Blind's army did not fare so well at the Battle of Chayei, but he would always live up to his motto of I serve. So at the height of bloodshed during this battle, he asked that he have one of his men lead him blind into the thickest amount of hand-to-hand combat, although he could see not a thing. He went in and fought blindly, courageously against the enemy until, of course, ultimately he was killed. But when the battle was over, King Edward of England walked amongst the battlefield. He wanted to see all of the different French bodies, seeing which noblemen had died. And when he came upon the body of his enemy, John the Blind, he instantly recognized him due to the crest on his helmet and his family's coat of arms. And it is said that King Edward, King of England, cried when he saw the body of John, and he knelt before the body as a sign of respect for a noble enemy. And he's later quoted, the king says, "Here fell the flower of European chivalry, but the most valiant of all of them was John." And after the battle, King Edward took John's helmet and banner as war trophies and hung them in his castle. And he later paid tribute to John's courage by adopting the 3 white ostrich feathers of his family's crest and his motto, Ich dien, or I serve, and he put them on the British 2-pence coin, which can still be found on modern-day British currency. It says, I serve. The figure of John the Blind became synonymous with gallantry, chivalry, and blind loyalty until death. So I guess my question for us tonight is, how many of us are willing to follow Rebecca or John's example? How many of us are willing to step up when times are difficult and say, I serve? It's certainly easy to pledge loyalty to something or someone when times are easy, but when things are rocky or uncertain, it's much more difficult to be willing to serve. I'm constantly amazed at our synagogue's willingness to serve, not only each other, but the entire community. Every time one of our bar or bat mitzvah kids has a project where they collect food or shoes for people in need, anytime when people have other projects where we collect food in the parking lot and distribute them through the food bank, every time we do this, we too are saying, I serve. Every time we come together, every time our community celebrates, I feel that we are saying to God and one another, I serve. And as a rabbi, there's no prouder thing that I can do than to serve you, the community that serves one another. Shabbat Shalom.